Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Welcome to another episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast. I'm here with James O'Reilly. Good to see you, James.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Lovely to be here.
Another fun topic to kick off today. And probably, I think this is where a lot of people start thinking about getting advice as well. Is this the story of transitioning to retirement? And transitioning to retirement can begin in your 40s, 50s, 60s, all kinds of things happen in your life. And I think we'll cover retiring early at different points as well. But a very broad topic. I think we're going to touch on everything from superannuation to different types of pensions. But I think the best place to start is, when can you start transitioning to retirement? And I'll put that question to you.
You can retire whenever you like, mate.
Whenever you like, yeah.
Whenever you like. So
the FIRE movement is quite popular.
Correct. Yes, there is a movement, as you said, for people that are looking to retire in their late 30s, early 40s, and so that's getting some momentum. More commonly, of course, you've got people retiring at from 60 onward. That seems to be the more frequent time that I observe. Yeah,
definitely. I think that is a simple answer, and I think too often we look at too much at what's happening in superannuation and this idea that you can only retire when you can access your superannuation. But there is so much ability to build assets outside of super. Super is just a tax structure that helps at the end. That, if you only looked at super, would tell you can't retire till you're 65. And then more broadly, the age pension doesn't kick in until you turn 67. I found an interesting tidbit, and this probably relates back to me. I'm not sure if tidbit is the right word or not, but
I like that word. I like tidbit.
I've tried some different explanations, and this probably goes more to the investing side. And we all think about we have to put as much money away as possible before we retire, and we have to, it's all about that dollar figure at the end. It's actually the 10-30-60 rule. As always, Googling around in research. And there's the idea that of the returns and what you generate in retirement, 10% actually comes from the savings, the savings and earnings on that. The 30% comes from earnings you've made from salary and everything you put in and the compounding that's happened on that. But more than 60% of the returns actually come during your retirement phase. And that tends to make sense, because your retirement, you're contributing probably only really from your mid to late 30s when your salary has started to increase. So there isn't that much time to contribute or compound. But then you're retired from 60, 65 for 25 to 30 years. So naturally it makes sense that that's when all your investment returns will come. But I think we still have this issue. This is probably going off topic, that when people retire, they think they're investing for the short term.
Yep.
My dad, for instance, won't. He probably invests like he buys wine. But if it needs to age more than 7 years, he won't buy it anymore, because I'll be drinking and not him.
I understand. Yeah,
that's probably going a little bit off topic, but
good tidbit.
I think and a good place to extend from that is, what should clients have in place when they start thinking about, or when they get to retirement? So whether they've come to you, what do you want them to have, or what was the first thing you tell them to have when they finally retired?
A good understanding of what their retirement is going to look like.
Yeah.
And that will come in as a combination of knowing what their costs are, knowing the stuff that they want to do, well, you said, what's the first thing? That's the first thing.
Yeah. And without that, you've got no real start. And I'd probably extend on that and say, so as part of that is understanding where your income source are going to be. So as you say, what are you going to do in retirement? Does that mean you're going to be working? You're going to do some part-time work as you go along? Will you travel a lot? And then a lot of times they don't necessarily lie to you, but they withhold, or they change their minds at different points. And I think that's an incredibly challenging part, but it also shows that retirement's never going to be linear.
Yeah.
And that it changes for different people. And I think I went through Mary's example in the first or second episode. Legislation changes, families change, markets change. So they say everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Mike Tyson.
That's retirement.
Just as a side note, we're talking about expenses. In a previous podcast, we covered it, and I went back and went through the retirement budget estimates for my members, and then like pre-retirement, and then what they actually were to look at the differentiation. and it was the average was 12% underestimate of what their expenses were going to be.
Oh, they underestimated what they'd spend. Yeah.
And to be clear, that came because that initial estimate, I think, was of a pretty high quality. We've got a detailed budget that covers all the different areas for you to add. Then we're adjusting and conservatively provisioning for holidays and so on. I feel like it's as good as it can be when we say, okay, we'll assume that your expenses are going to be 80K per annum or whatever the figure is. And if it was 80, then actually it's 12% out. So it's like 89.6. So pretty consistently. Yeah. I
feel like my clients would overestimate, but I'm not sure. We haven't really done that.
Interesting.
That deep cash flow analysis, sorry. And how important or how much can you use super in that transition to retirement? If we think you're, say, it's someone in their 50s, maybe it's 55 is a good starting point. It used to matter being 55, doesn't anymore.
No.
But how important is super? We know all the benefits of it. It's tax-free when you retire, and we'll go into that a bit more detail. But what role can super play in your transition to retirement strategy?
Well, from 55, as you said, it used to matter, but it matters less now. And the reason that it does is because of that term condition of release, when you can actually access your super. It matters enormously in the sense that if you're using it well, it can help to fund your future years, and a lot of them. But realistically, it's really 60 now before we can confidently start using that money and do things with it.
Yeah, so conditions of release are now limited condition is 60, and if you cease some sort of work, gainful employment after that, you're able to access your super in most cases. Or 65 is the true retirement date where you get full access to your superannuation, and that's kind of, I don't think a lot of people quite understand that you literally can do anything you want with your super at 65. Not that you should, but you can.
Yep.
And we want to talk about transition to retirement pensions, but I think it's better to actually discuss this idea of what a pension is.
Yes.
There's essentially two types, and let's put defined benefit pensions to the side. There's two types of pensions: an account-based pension and the age pension. Can you walk us through the account-based pension and how that fits into a transition to retirement strategy?
Yeah, sure. Your account-based pension is when it is using your superannuation money. It's when you flick that switch for it to go from what we call accumulation mode, which if you think about the wording, that's where the balance is growing, across to pension mode, where it's no longer growing by way of contributions. At least it's now depleting because you are drawing a regular income. So there's separation. The easiest way to look at this is that an accumulation account typically can only receive money and it cannot pay out. So it can't pay you that regular pension. If you are an accumulator, you have regular contributions going in and you're working, and then that time comes that, all right, I would like to now retire, you're going to convert your superannuation balance from an accumulation fund to an account-based pension or an allocated pension. And an allocated pension is where it will now pay you a regular income. And you can't contribute to an allocated pension the same way. It can only pay out, it cannot receive. So they're intentionally two different ways to have your superannuation.
Essentially, it's the self-funded best retirement income mechanism. And so and what we've talked about in the past is once you commence that pension, that fund becomes tax exempt, or the assets supporting that pension become tax exempt. But in return for that, you have to draw a minimum of your balance out every year.
That's right.
It starts at 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, 14. I think every advisor knows that burnt into the back of their brain for some reason.
It does. And that is important to be aware that, like, for example, if you're 60 years old and you say, I'd like to set up a pension, it's time to start transitioning to retirement, for instance. That might come because you decide to reduce your hours at work, which is a strategy that I support entirely if you can financially justify it. Life's short. We've talked before about the importance of enjoying your golden years. You wrote a damn book about it. And so, and so as part of that, if you've got the bandwidth to do that, then that makes perfect sense. The fact that the money's going to be tax-free once you set that pension up in a lot of cases can be really advantageous. And it enables you to perhaps go from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. But where's that income shortfall going to come from? Well, of course, it's going to come from your retirement savings. And
one of the issues I've seen consistently is that so many people think that the minimum pension they have to draw is what they should be spending. So if the pension's 9%, they think they need to spend all 9%. If it's 4%, they think they have to live off 4%. But they're literally just government set up percentage figures, and they're basically making sure that all your money is drawn from super over your entire retirement, so there's none left when you pass.
Yep.
This is essentially how they're structured. They're not a guide. They have no relationship to how much you should be spending in retirement. They're literally just a legislated minimum. So I always say, break away from that. And then before we go into transition, it's probably worth noting that an account-based pension will only last as long as the investment returns and how much you're drawing, which is the opposite to, say, a defined benefit pension, which is very rare these days unless you're a politician or part of the public service. And then the extension of that would be the fallback for Australians, which is the Commonwealth's, the age pension.
And so the age pension, to confirm that is a separate payment. With the allocated pension, of course, that money is that's the money that you've saved through your superannuation fund over time, and now you can take a pension. With the age pension, you don't necessarily have to have or you haven't saved any assets for this.
Yeah.
This is an amount that gets paid to you by the government, comes via Centrelink,
like a safety net.
Yep, that's right, and that's a regular payment. It's what we call means tested, and what that means is that if you're financially very well off, then you're less likely to get it, or perhaps you don't qualify at all. Whereas people with lower net wealth, if we say they and lower incomes, they're the ones that are going to be entitled to that regular fortnightly payment.
Yeah, excluding your house, of course. And the pension's changed a bit in recent years. So the retirement age to access the age pension is now up to 67. And it hasn't caused us uproar as much in Australia as it has in other places. But for context, it's only you're only eligible to receive a small amount of pension if, as an individual, you have less than $686,000, or if you're a couple, you have less than $1,031,000, excluding the value of your home. Now that we've kind of talked about those, it's probably worth reversing back. Transition to retirement pensions were incredibly popular, probably only 5 years ago, maybe. Maybe my
that sounds about right.
Memory is going. Can you walk us through, is there any benefit of transition to retirement pensions? I know you talked about replacing income with that, or is the benefit kind of reduced?
Yeah,
or very limited circumstances.
Yeah, Well, I think they're still highly advantageous, but the benefit is now for them to use them with the intention of how they're used.
Yeah.
If I think back to my early years as a financial advisor, transition to retirement pensions, you could, from 55, set up a pension. And from that date, you'd have no internal tax within the superannuation fund, which was pretty bloody cool at 55. And then you could also draw down a regular income from
up to 10%.
Up to 10%.
Yeah.
Now, what that meant is I would sit down with a lot of people who didn't need that money.
Most people thought it was illegal.
But what you would be doing is just drawing down the money from the superannuation fund, and that would give you enough surplus income to then put it straight back into superannuation as a tax deduction, and just cycle that through and get this incredible tax outcome. So it would have been, let me see, I reckon it would have been about 2016, 2017 when they changed. And it was one of those moments where you scratch your head and you're like, yeah, fair enough. Okay. We have really been, getting the most out of that strategy. So because they've changed the tax advantages, it still absolutely plays its part, and it's still beneficial. But the key differentiator is that because the tax is no longer as advantageous, really the time when it works is when you actually want to transition to retirement. Yeah. And so I say, okay, from now on, I'm going to take a smaller income from my employer, and I'm going to need to supplement that. How do I do it? And the answer is a transition to retirement pension.
And it's pushed out from 55 to 60 now, and it's probably very limited to the circumstances where you stop a full-time employment and then you're re-engaged, or you engage in a different career or a different path after retiring after 60. That's where the true tax benefit comes back again. If tax is what your priority is, and for most people it seems to be paying as little tax as is fair, is where most of them start.
There is there's a loophole here which I think eventually will be closed. There is one remaining, so to speak, and that's around breaking news. You've heard it, which is the condition of release. Yeah. So as you mentioned, it's typically if you want to access your superannuation, as in all of it, tax-free, typically that would come from turning 65, retiring. Yeah. But also there is one of the conditions of release is ceasing gainful employment after the age of 60.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly beneficial for someone who, for example, works a second job, because it doesn't stipulate that you have to cease your main
employment.
occupation. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So we have a circumstance with one of our members where they work as a teacher. They work only a few days a week. And so they can absolutely set up a transition to retirement pension. But having said that, they were considering over the summer doing some extra work. Now, not only for a few months, and we knew that one of the benefits of that, if you go and do that work, if you intend to cease it after summer, we're going to have a letter from your employer, like your other employer, not your main employer, that says, yep, you've left. Yeah. And that's going to enable us to change your transition to retirement pension across to an allocated pension.
Complete flexibility.
Correct. And as soon as we do that, we don't have a 10% maximum drawdown. We have 0% tax inside the fund. Very, very beneficial. Now, I'd canvass this for anyone who's saying, happy days, I'm going to go and get myself a 1 day a week job with my best mate for 2 days and then quit.
It has to be legit.
It has to be legit. Yeah, the ATO has what's called Part 4A legislation, which basically means that if they can identify that you did something with the express purpose of reducing or eliminating tax, they can just reverse the effect of that altogether. Yeah.
And make you pay more.
That's right. Yeah, correct. So with that in mind, you should use it with the intent of the legislation or what it was designed for. But if you do have multiple roles, some people, you're 60 years old or 62 and you leave one employer and you start a new employer because I found this great job offer. Guess what? You've just met a condition of release and you can now access your superannuation and you can put that into a purely tax-free environment. It's not to say you should, but certainly at that time, for me, that's a big one to get advice on.
I mean, it's probably the perfect segue to the biggest question, which is, I've retired. Do I just chuck it all in term deposits now?
And yes is the answer.
I think, and it's a vexed question. We've covered it briefly in the previous episode, but I think in that transition to retirement probably makes even more sense. I know when I look at it, it can be difficult when you meet a client for the first time as they're retiring, but transitioning into retirement is a transition, and I view it exactly the same from an investment perspective. You have the ability, if it is a transition period, to actually get a better understanding of what you will spend in retirement and what your investments need to look like. But absolutely, no, you don't need to completely change your asset allocation and the way you're investing on the day you retire.
Agreed.
I hope you
couldn't agree more. Well, frankly, if there was a need, it's a long pause, wasn't it? If you were looking to make a change on the date that you retired, for example, then why wasn't it worthy of making a change the day before you retired?
Yeah. And a lot of the cases for us, we'll do it over a number of quarters or a number of years that we see there's a transition and you're trying to move from active to passive income, but we'll have a goal of moving it, from a more growthy approach to more balanced within a 3 to 4 to 5 year period. And you have to give consideration to what's happening in the environment around you at the same time.
Sure.
And probably we talk about this a lot in the book, and you've touched on in the past, which is the behavioural and emotional and psychological experience that's retirement. We've kind of worked out how do you start the active to passive income step. We start a pension or we apply for a pension, basically. But how do you deal with that as an advisor, and how do you help clients navigate that, what can be a very challenging period?
The first thing that stands out to me here is that your retirement is not going to look the way you think it will.
No.
Just like your employment years didn't look the way that you think they did in almost all cases. And this will be the same. You're with the newfound time, hopefully newfound time that you have, maybe it gets soaked up with something else. But with that time, in the coming years, you're going to allocate that in ways that you didn't predict. And you're going to want holidays or to go back to places that you didn't actually think you wanted to go to.
Yeah.
Those are all normal experiences in retirement after that big change. So the first thing that stands out to me here is that you should walk into your retirement planning wanting flexibility around the overall structure of your finances, because it needs to be able to evolve with you.
Yeah.
Coming back to the change from active to passive, for example, and the investments and how we do that. Similarly, very few things in retirement have to be done, like retirement planning have to be done this minute. Yeah. Sometimes there's like, for example, the door shuts on this next month, or one of those sorts of scenarios from a legislative perspective. But for you, in terms of your investment composition, things can move slowly. So I agree. This is something where we want to make sure that there's enough income for people, because that's I think one of the biggest drivers for people to feel confident about their retirement, knowing that month in, month out, there is a payment of X $1,000 going into my bank account that replaces my salary. If you can get that bit right, for me, that's the biggest and most important first step to facilitating a comfortable retirement.
And I think it's a big area where retirement can go off the rails. Like I've seen people in families where they've got everything they need, they're completely fine, but they haven't engaged or they don't quite understand investments or what's going to happen, they haven't informed themselves and they haven't been part of the education process. Most advisors are quite good at giving resources, and it can be incredibly uncomfortable. Like I'd put the example forward consistently, which is, say you retire with $2 million and you've contributed to super your entire life and you earn say $100,000, $150,000 a year. The market can drop in a week. And we've seen it. We only saw it. We're recording in August, September. We only saw it a month or so ago. That it can drop 10%. And if 10% on a $2 million portfolio is $200,000, you can see, more than a year's salary disappear in front of your eyes. Not disappear, but just gone in your portfolio value overnight. So being, prepared for that.
Yes.
And I have a couple of ways that I advise or I try to help people prepare for that. And as you said, knowing that income is going to come in regardless and that you're actually managing cash flow. You're not linking, the income that you're producing to the dividends or the distributions, but the long-term expected total return that's going to come out of your portfolio. The second part is this idea of sleep at night. So what level of cash? You've said a regular income coming out, and what we try and do is match that to when your salary used to come out. So making sure that the same money is coming into your bank account regardless. But more importantly, ensuring you've got a level of cash is somewhere, I'm not going to say socked away again, but somewhere that you can see and is always there. And for a lot of people, it takes quite a few years to realize what that number is. We know that if it's, for someone it's, 3 months worth of income, it could be $50,000. For someone else, it's 2 years worth of income. It could be $200,000 that they need. But working out that number and knowing you've got that always there to support your lifestyle or when emergencies happen, I find that incredibly powerful to help people navigate those difficult periods that come with passive investing. Because investing, you've got a finite pool of capital. We say it all the time. You can't add to that capital anymore. You're literally determined by investment returns. So that's the most important thing and something we all kind of have to focus on all the time.
Yeah. Hey, to add to that, I think there's I welcome your comments here, but I observe that there is a real behavioural adjustment that comes from being able to access your super.
Yeah. And
I think that impacts, for example, like it came to me as I was thinking about socking away some money into a bank or whatever it would be. And I find that it takes at least a couple of years in a lot of cases for people to come to terms with the fact that, if I want money from my superannuation fund, I can get it in a matter of days. Yeah. It's very fast and it's regular. And I think just years and years of not having access to it, and then perhaps feeling as though that there was a lot of work for us to set up pensions and do that sort of stuff. Once you've got that stuff set up, you have a remarkably easy access,
fully accessible.
That's right.
And not many there's not many structures that really allow that.
Correct. And quick too. Yeah. So in terms of setting your own amount that you want to have as a cash balance for that rainy day, it stands to reason that you want to try to leave as much of your retirement money in your retirement as possible.
Yeah.
We talked before about the fact that with allocated pensions, when you're a retiree, you can't contribute into allocated pensions anymore. Once you move all of your money across to pension phase, the only way to contribute back into super is to open a new accumulation account, which in a lot of cases you can do after 65, but regardless, you can see that it's a little bit more clunky. And so as part of that, being confident that you can get money out of your superannuation when you need will hopefully enable you to have a lower cash float or not have this ultra conservative cash float of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which you just don't need. That means that more money can be doing what it's supposed to do. It can be sitting in your allocated pension in a tax-free environment, hopefully getting good long-term returns and protecting your retirement.
It brings something up, a common issue for me as well, which is where people have assets both inside superannuation and outside.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
essentially what you want to do and what we think, and is exactly what you're saying there, is that you want to maximize what's in that retirement, that zero tax environment. So if you've got personal assets, it might feel uncomfortable, but a good advice will always be reduce the amount of assets that are in that taxable environment and keep your superannuation intact as much as possible, particularly when you're talking about larger balance, a couple of million in superannuation and those kind of situations.
Absolutely. I think I really want to double down on that point. For listeners, you just you can't undervalue too much the idea of having something that's tax-free. And the long-term effect of that. If you've ever seen any modeling on retirement and you've had the opportunity to look at, for example, what does 7% do versus 8% do, you'll notice it's actually a really big difference. The compounding effect year on year means your money lasts for a lot longer. And 7% versus 8% is basically just the difference between 7% having paid 15% tax or 8% having paid zero. And so with that in mind, this if you structure your assets well, this really is one of the free hits that you get in retirement, and you should be trying to use it as best you can.
I think maybe we address one of the biggest questions and elephants in the room regularly. I mean, the biggest company in Australia at the time of recording, I believe, is the Commonwealth Bank, just ahead of BHP potentially. All right, mate, I might be a little bit off
I think
there.
It's BHP, but
it's
all
just
good.
BHP. One of the biggest banks, the biggest bank in Australia. I'll take that. I'll dial that back slowly. And it is this idea of if you're transitioning to retirement, what role does residential investment property play in retirement? And is it something that is increasingly popular? What are some of the challenges that come with it? And what are you seeing? Probably a good question is, what are you seeing clients do with property as they head towards retirement?
Well, firstly, property is a very good investment. We cannot look past that.
You can say it depends as well.
Yeah, no, I'm all in here. It is a good investment in a risk-adjusted way. It performs very well. We talked in previous episode about the idea that it's not just about the return that you get, but also how steady that return is. Yeah. And if we're thinking about residential property, for example, we haven't had, certainly not in my lifetime, an experience where property falls by 20% in over a year. But that's happened a number of times if you're investing in the share market, for example. Yeah. And so there can be some real benefits there. Having said that, there are also some immediate drawbacks. I mean, the obvious ones that stand out to me, firstly, is that rental income. Often you'll find that if you were to invest that money, let's say you wanted to buy, for simplicity, a $500,000 property, if your goal in retirement is regular income to help fund your lifestyle, well, it's very likely that we can get quite easily another parcel of investments that is much more easily available. We can probably hold much more easily in a tax-free environment and manage the tax if we're holding it personally with higher ongoing income on a more regular basis.
I think one of the big things I see is that residential investment property works better as part of a broader portfolio. That if you've got a portion of liquid assets, as shares, funds, ETFs, whatever they happen to be, and property alongside it, that tends to be the better blend because we know it's simple, and we say it all the time. Diversification. When you build a diversified portfolio, you're getting multiple sources of income. It could be from infrastructure, it could be from banks, it could be resources, it could be any part of the bonds, whatever. Every single part of the global economy. When you have a property, you have one tenant in most cases, unless you're buying an apartment block, and you have one building and what is generally a depreciating asset. So,
yes.
As we've said, they're both great tools to accumulate wealth over time, but I see it as working better in a diversified portfolio.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I know it's only limited to Melbourne at the moment, but we're looking at the property price growth in the last 12 months around Australia, and it's in high double digits and into the 20% in some cities, and Melbourne is essentially zero, or gone backwards.
Slightly negative.
And you've seen a massive tax change that happened in Victoria, and that's one of the other risks, I think, of investing in a single asset class, not just property, but something changes in that asset class that impacts the value, and that can happen in shares, it can happen in sectors, not just this asset class, but I think it's something we always have to keep in mind.
One of the things to add to that too is the idea of that concept of tax. One of the disadvantages of holding a property, ignoring holding it through super, which you can do, absolutely, but you can only do that through a self-managed superannuation fund, which comes with its own breadth of advantages and disadvantages. That's not for everyone. If you own a property, then you can't sell it slice by slice. When you sell it, you dispose of the entire thing.
Yeah.
And what that means is you're really likely to encounter a single tax event with a really large gain.
Yeah.
So hopefully that means that your investment's been good. So again, we'll use an example where you spend $800,000 on an investment property. Maybe it grows by 50% over the coming 5 to 10 years, which would be pretty conservative based on historical averages. But let's use that number. We have a 50% gain. We're going to end up paying tax realistically of probably 40 to 50K, somewhere in that sort of zone when we sell that property, even after taking into account the discounts that are available and some of those things. That can also have a flow on if you've got any age pension eligibility, then holding property that can hurt there. And I agree. It's less advantageous, generally speaking, for a retiree or a pre-retiree unless it forms part of a broader mix.
You want flexibility in retirement. I think is what we see. Flexibility and resilience.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
The common saying is you can't sell a brick or a bathroom. So, when you get unexpected, you want to go traveling and you can't sell part of your house to do that. That's one of the biggest challenges as a single retirement asset, I think would be the key. Not
to mention, lastly, that if in a lot of cases, unless you're buying property outright, borrowing for property is really common. We talk about negative gearing. If your taxable income is zero or really low because you've retired, and as a reminder, the money that you take from an allocated pension, the tax on that is zero. So that's not contributing toward your taxable income for the year. Very likely as a retiree, you might have no tax. You don't need to lodge a tax return. So the value of negative gearing is, you guessed it, zero. And that's a really formidable benefit when investing in property. So again, for accumulators, broader portfolios, et cetera.
Leverage, long-term. Yeah.
A much better play.
I think a great place to finish this would be maybe a tip on what's the worst investment mistake you've seen someone in the transition to or at the point of retirement?
Having all of their money in a single lithium miner.
Oh, you're not joking.
No, all of it. Yeah.
So lack of diversification.
Yes, lack of diversification. Yes.
That's the advisor way to say it.
Yeah. It was, brutal. And luckily enough, luckily enough, we got to it at a time when lithium prices were quite high. Okay. And it was hard to talk him off the edge too and say like, hey, this is not a wise strategy. And he was saying, but look around me. I'm going to the moon here and saying, well, yes, great. But you are just about to retire and you've got this huge amount of confident energy about where it's going because it's been so good over the last little while. But of course, that's not necessarily going to continue.
I'd have to say mine is it's repetitive. It's a story I tell all the time. It's this idea and concept that people, as soon as they get to retirement, they just want to invest for income. And in history and all the analysis and data shows that if you're investing in assets that only produce income and pay out all their profits as income, they're not going to grow. So essentially you own a depreciating asset that provides you an income in the short term, but over the long term will probably just deflate or devalue your retirement money. So, and just before we close out, James, can you give our listeners something they can do right now as they prepare to transition to retirement?
Yeah, I would encourage for you to consider all the assets that you hold in your own name and think about which of these assets are actually going to best suit you as you move toward retirement. Maybe this is an area where you might want to engage with an advisor or an accountant, or alternatively, maybe this is something that you can look at yourself. But how well suited are the assets that you have right now to holding once you finish work?
And given you've stolen mine, I'm going to go with a book recommendation and not my book. There's a book called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel that kind of covers as we've talked about, the behavioral aspects and the difficulty in transitioning from active to passive income as you go into retirement, among many other things. Great read. It's just everyone goes out and gets a copy or reaches out. We might have a small giveaway for a couple as well.
Yeah, spot on. Good advice, but also a small point of order. I didn't steal it. Like maybe I did some telekinesis. You didn't explain what you were going for. So
thanks for joining me again, James, and thanks for listening to the Australian Retirement Podcast.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.